Welcome to lesson 3 of networks and topologies. What we're going to be doing in this lesson is looking at the different roles of computers in a client server and a peer-to-peer network. Now on the surface it's quite a simple concept, but it doesn't take much to actually get a little bit too deep and lose track of understanding. So in this lesson I'm going to try and keep it as simple as possible, because we are going to be dealing with a lot of the points a bit later on in the course, particularly the grey bullet points beneath today's lesson. And it is a huge topic, so it's difficult to get over in a very short period of time. I'm going to start with some definitions. We've got client, server and peer. We need to have an understanding what they are, and really I think you need an analogy, something for you to grab hold of to understand. So a client is a computer that requests data and services from a server. It's an everyday computer that you use in school. So if you're sat down in room 25 at your computer, as a network technician, I think of that as a client. There's lots of different meanings for the word client. So when you're on the internet and you've got a browser, I call the browser a client. So we can lose track of where we are just on the sort of overuse of the same words. So a client, it's the computer that you are sat at in room 25. Now, the analogy that I want you to think of is that you're in a restaurant, really, and you've gone out for a meal with family, and there's three things. There's you sat at the table, you're the client waiting for your dinner, reading a menu and waiting to order. And the person you order it from is the server, the waitress or the waiter. So a server, in computing terms, that's something that provides services and data for other computers on the network. It's normally a powerful, really high performance computer, but doesn't need to be. This is really depending on the size, and it's the same for the restaurant. The more people who are in the restaurant, the more servers you're going to need. So the server is the person who takes your order and takes it to the chef. The chef cooks up your dinner and the server brings it to your table. And that's the whole point of it. You're the client, you just ask for something and the server does all the work. And there's a chef somewhere, and that's the computer working really hard, making everything happen, either finding files or finding web pages and giving it to the server to bring back to your computer. The last word I want to introduce you to is a peer. Now, a peer is a computer that is a part of a network that is not controlled by a server. And pretty much when you're at home with your home network and everybody's got their devices or laptops or computers all sort of connected up, you're actually all peers. Peers really means to say that you all have equal status. So no one is controlling the network, no one machine, no one iPhone or Samsung Galaxy is controlling the network. They all connect to the network, they all connect to the internet, they're all of equal status and they're called peers. And we can have a network exactly the same. We can have a network just made up of peers, computers. So instead of going to a server, really they connect to one another. And that's probably where the difficulty comes in. Some more definitions that I really want you to think about is the term user. That's really a person who just uses a computer. Maybe they do some word processing or spreadsheet work or uses paint to draw a picture to achieve some sort of goal. And really that's in the realms of ICT. A programmer is a person who creates software. Now, I'm a programmer and I create software for users, and that is really embedded in computer science. You really need to understand computer science, all the binary, this, that and the other, to actually be a programmer. So a programmer is also a user. Obviously I use Word and things like that, so I use the ICT, I'm a user, but I'm a step up that's not to be sort of big-headed or anything else like that. It's just a little bit more information in my toolkit to actually create software for other people to use. And then we have somebody who is a technician, who their job is to really manage a network. So they put the computers in, they build the computers, they put the software on them, they put the cabling in. It's quite a job. But not only do they do the hard stuff, the hardware, they also manage the computers with software. And so they're kind of sort of midway between ICT and computer science. The knowledge they need is definitely computer science. And Mr. Adams is a technician. I can't do his job. Not at the moment anyway. I'd need to train for quite a while to be really good at his job. But I want you to be aware of the differences of these people. You are either going to be a programmer or a technician. That's what the computer science course is about. We are now looking at the work of a technician. Up till now, we've really looked at the work of a programmer. So let's take a look at a client-server network. At the bottom, I've got a picture showing 3 computers, like 3 people sat in room 25, and they're all connected to one machine which is located elsewhere in the school. So a client-server network contains 2 main types of computer, a client and a server. Now, in room 25, there's probably 30 clients and maybe 1 server. But actually, there could be quite a few servers involved in this. Each computer that's connected to the network is available for general use, is called a client. And what I mean by general use is you're using it for word processing or browsing the internet. Each of the clients is connected to a central computer in the network called the server, or a couple of computers called servers. So there may be more than one. It's certainly commonplace to have 2 servers doing exactly the same job. We call one a mirror. So every time you write a file, instead of it going to one server, it goes to both servers. Just in case one of the server fails, then we have a backup server ready to just jump in and take over the job. A client server may have one single central server, or it may have several performing different functions. And what I mean by functions, that the servers are there for different roles, which is what we're talking about in this lesson. They may have a role of being a mail server, so they handle incoming and outgoing mail. They may be a web server, so they're interested in delivering web pages or building web pages. May even be a print server, which is there to take the documents that you want and send them to the correct printer at the right time. There's lots of different roles which we shall have a look shortly that we can do. So it allows a variety of functions to be performed on the network from one computer instead of having to carry it out on each of the individual clients, the machines that you've got. So they include access control with usernames and passwords. Now, even if you've got a standalone computer, you'll still probably need a username and password to log on to that machine. But we tend to have usernames and passwords on a server. And when you log in, you get the little box in the front, please enter your username, please enter your password. That goes to the server and it checks to see if you are eligible to be logged on to that network, and if you are, it lets you on. Now that's different to being logged on to the computer. That's the access control we're talking about here is access to the network and the resources. It also manages security. So instead of each and every single computer in the school having sort of a virus checker or malware checkers, it can be just managed on the one server. So you only need the one program running and it will check all the files and it will check everything that comes through the internet. before it reaches the client. So we don't need to install software on the individual clients. It manages it centrally on the server. And that word centrally is really important. Data storage, so where you save your files, you don't save them on the computer you're sat at. I mean, it is possible to do so. It would take a little bit of manipulation, but it is possible to save it on the computer that you're sitting at, but you don't have access to the C drive. So they're all stored on one machine on the server, and we call that really a file server. It's also got jobs of monitoring the network traffic, so it can perform actions depending on the time of day and how much traffic there is on the network. So it can allocate more resources or stop certain things happening if there are too many people on, or they're downloading too many videos, for example. It manages your internet connections. So basically, each computer links to the server, and it's only the server that has access to the internet. And what can happen is if somebody's sort of misusing the internet in any possible way, then their connection can be severed. You can stop that particular client having access to the internet, but everybody else can have access. It can also manage printing jobs. So when you send something to the printer, actually you're sending it to the server, and the server prioritizes those jobs. Some jobs are more important to have printed. So some teacher might be printing out exam papers, which may take about 2,000 sheets of paper, but you want to print out your work to hand in for homework, which consists of one sheet of paper. It might move yours to the top of the list so it gets printed out first. So it can manage the printing services. It can provide email services, which we'll have a look at shortly, and we'll certainly look at this when we deal with protocols. So it can be something that you can log into to get your email, or you can use it to send email through. And it can also be used to be a spam filter or anything else like that. Because it's all central, before it comes to your computer, it's managed. And also, if we're going to back up all the work, rather than back up the 30 computers in room 25, one after the other, onto some sort of memory stick or external hard drive, there's just one place to back it up. You just back up the server, and then we've got all the data we need. It's a really easy thing to do. So a server is really, really useful. But it consists of all of these services, which services are basically programs that run. If a client-server network is particularly large, it will have many servers instead of just the one server. So for the school, we may have 2 or 3 servers running. But if we were in a small business, we might just have 1 server. But if we were in a large organisation like Amazon or something else like that, each one of these bullet points here might have its own machine to manage it. And particularly when we're doing email services or internet connections or being a web server, they will be separate machines. You won't notice that. The way the network works, it will just route whatever information that you're trying to do, whether you're trying to send an email or download a web page or handle your file, it will route it to the correct machine to get the work for you. And that makes the network run really efficiently. So when you are in the exam, again, advantages and disadvantages are going to be the main point that you'll be looking at. So the advantages of a client-server network. It's centralized. The server is centralized for security. So you can make sure that all the computers are up to date with their security. So if there's a new virus that's found, the server knows about the new virus and then can check each and every one of the computers, rather than you go around installing software on to see, or installing a virus checker on to see if this new virus is on your computer. It's also a centralized process for backup. So you don't need to worry about backing up your data on the computer. Levels of access can be applied to stored data, making sure the correct people see the correct data. Now, inside the school, maybe we've got an admin section and we've got a student section. And obviously we don't want the students to be able to see what the administration is of the school. You don't need to know about the finance. You don't need to know about the timetabling or anything else like that. So we can say you don't have permission to see this particular information. And we call that levels of access. It can also be a centralized process for updating software. So when a new piece of software is updated, maybe Adobe Photoshop or something else like that, the server can send out to each individual machine in the room the updates. Again, you don't need to go around with a CD or a memory stick and install the updates on each of those computers. It will be done centrally. Disadvantages of a client-server network: they're expensive, particularly as more and more people are connected to the network. The larger the network, the more expensive it is. It has a lot of hardware, which we will look at in the future, and that needs to be bought. And servers in particular are expensive to purchase. So if you're running a large organization, you certainly don't want an old machine to operate as your server. You'll want the latest spec machine with 64 cores and terabytes or petabytes of data storage and so on. You'll need the most up-to-date machinery that you can possibly have, and that comes at a cost. They're also expensive to maintain because you can't just connect the computers to a machine and hope that it's going to run properly. They take time to administer. They take time to build, and we really need specialist staff like Mr. Adams, who needs to be hired, and he costs a lot of money per year to maintain the network. If a server fails, this may cause some functions of the network to become unavailable. In fact, it would probably down the entire network, because that's where your files are stored, that's where your email goes, that's where your printing is. So once the server goes down, basically your network's gone down, which is why a lot of the time we have a mirror, two servers doing exactly the same job, so that if one goes down, the other one quickly jumps in and takes over that function. So again, not only is that a disadvantage in it failing, that you lose some of the functions, but you've got to think of the cost of duplicating, having two servers being identical, and they're costly to begin with. So let's take a look at a peer-to-peer network, or P2P. This is pretty much like your home network. Each computer in this network is known as a peer, and a peer-to-peer network does not have a central server to manage. You don't need to log on to anything to access the network. You can just attach your device to the router, obviously your Wi-Fi, but you don't need to log on to get your files because they're not stored anywhere. They're stored on your machine. So if you've got your phone, you take a picture of whatever you want, and that is stored on your phone. It's not available on anybody else's phone. Unlike, let's think about this. If you've got two phones and you take a picture on one phone, you can't just log on to the other phone and see that picture. It's not there. Now, that is a peer-to-peer network. But if you've got sort of a client server, if you took a picture on your phone, it wouldn't be stored on the phone. It would be stored elsewhere. So it wouldn't matter which phone you logged on or started up, you would always be able to get hold of that picture. So that's kind of the difference between the two. It doesn't have a central server to manage the network. The management of all the functions is down to the responsibility of each individual peer. Now, this is like having a standalone computer but you link it to somebody else's, and from time to time you might want to access files or things that are on that device. Again, you might want to share a photo with somebody, so you might airdrop it to another device. Each computer on the network is able to share files and resources with other computers on the network, and they can do this by making them available in a public area. Now, if you have a folder, and I've got several on here, hopefully I can show you, you can share that folder, and all the information that is in that folder would be available to all of those devices. But that's not a central client-server network. That is a peer-to-peer. It's just on one machine, but you've made a link to that machine to your router. So, advantages and disadvantages of peer-to-peer networks. Advantages: they're really cheap to set up, as they don't require expensive servers, so you've only got the cheap computers to worry about. They're cheaper to maintain, as it doesn't require any specialist staff. So you don't need a technician in your house. You might want to be a technician to get them all working, but you don't need to employ one to keep your network up and running. If any peer fails on the network, only the resources on that peer are unavailable. So going back to the phone analogy, if your phone crashes and breaks, then all you've lost is the pictures that were on that particular phone. One thing I'm going to say before I move on to the disadvantages is that I've used the word here cheaper, and in the previous one I used expensive. Don't just say in the exam it's cheaper. A peer-to-peer network is cheaper. You need to give a reason why it is cheaper or more expensive. The disadvantages of a peer-to-peer network: there isn't any centralized process managing the data and security. So it's not as secure, and really you have to manage each and every single device. So if you've got a virus protection on one device and not on another, then you're going to have problems. And you're going to spend a lot of time, if you've got 5 or 6 devices going around each individual one, maintaining the virus protection on each of those, uploading or changing the security levels. Each user will need to make sure they can run their own backup, as this is not performed centrally. So you need to put everything onto a memory stick and take it away with you. But if you are working on 2 or 3 different machines, then you're going to have to back up each of those machines, and that could take time. If we had Room 25, if that was a peer-to-peer network instead of a client-server network, every night we would have to attach a USB form of device, either a large hard drive or something, and download all the files from each of the machines. That would be quite a task. If a peer-to-peer network has got many peers on it, that's going to cause a lot of network traffic, and it may make the network run slowly. That's the kind of point where you think, okay, we don't need to have this kind of network, we need to move over to a client-server network. So that's basically it. Let's take you through 1 or 2 things. So you could stop the video at this point and just move on. I've made my points. I want to show you these 2 things. Here I've got a server, and I'm going to log on to the server. So I want to show you 1 or 2 bits and pieces as far as the roles are concerned. So if I go to manage my server is on a domain called FHS. In fact, it's called fhs.year10.foresthigh.org. That's a domain name which will come across later. But we've got a server, looks a lot different to sort of Windows that you've been used to. And basically all those roles that I mentioned previously, we can make our server work for it. At the moment, this server is configured to be a file server, so all of your files will be saved on it. It's also what we call a domain controller. So it's keeping usernames and passwords. So you have to log on to the server to be able to use the computer you're sat at. It's also a DHCP server, which we will discuss at some other point when we deal with routers and wireless access points. I can add or remove roles, and I just want to show you the roles that this server could take up. It can be a print server or a file server. It is configured to be a file server, but not a print server. An application server, that would mean it would be a web server, so it's not set up to be a web server. It's not set up to be a mail server with POP3 or SMTP. They're called protocols. That stands for Post Office Protocol version 3. And this SMTP is Simple Mail Transfer Protocol. This is for receiving, POP, and that's for sending, SMTP. A terminal server. So I know you use a computer when you're sat in room 25, but if you could imagine that all you've got is the keyboard and screen and no black case, that would be a terminal server. And actually the black case would be the server containing all the programs that you need to run. It could be a VPN server. It is a domain controller, which is making use of usernames and passwords. We will be looking at DNS and DNS servers a bit later on, but this is not one of them. DHCP server, as I said, we will look at that when we take a look at routers. We could turn this into a streaming media server, so we could send videos out, so people could sort of request videos, and this would stream videos to them. Again, if you think about the power of the computer needed to do that, it is quite large, and wins we won't cover. So they're the different roles that this server can take, and it's just software. Each one of these, I could have many servers and just set each server up to be one single thing, or I can have this server, one machine, and set up all of them on there. I'm just going to go to something called Active Directory at the moment. It's for setting up users and computers, and I want to show you how it's sort of managed in a server. I can create a group. So if I create a group, let's say Computer Club. And I've now got one group called Computer Club, which can have members. So I could set this up to probably have just games or something that you need to come along to Computer Club at 3:15 till 4:15, and that is the only time you'd be able to play it or play games, because I could set restrictions that just work for Computer Club. So I could completely stop the whole school using it unless they were members of the Computer Club. So I can now set up users on my domain, and unless you've got a user account, you cannot join the network. So let me create a user. So let me create Joe Blogs, and here's my domain, year10.foresthigh.org, and I could give him a logon name, jblogs, and that would be his entire username to log on to the network. Now notice when you do log on to your network in school, you just normally give the first part, jblogs, but you could also give the @foresthigh.org domain part as well to get on. So that's how to create a user. So I've got one user, and I can set a default password, and if you notice that I must change the password when they log on. So I've got several ways of managing the security of my network, how they can log on, about the password. If I just type password, that's the password that they need to type in to get onto the system. And with this ticked, when they log on, it will ask them to change their password. There we go, a little bit of details, and I've created a user. Now we've got here a policy working at saying that the password isn't good enough because it doesn't meet the requirements. You've seen that several times when setting your own. So let's change that one to be at capital P password 1, and that should meet the requirements. Password 1. And I can change those requirements. I could just say you need to type in 2 characters for your password. So I've created a user and I've created a group. Now in my group, where is my group? Computer Club, there we go. I could say, let's add some members and let's add JBlogs. There we go, JBlogs. I've checked the name to the group. When I click OK, I've now got JBlogs belonging to that group. And I can set policies to this group. So these are the only people who could play games on the internet. So I could unfilter just for this group. And I can have many different groups. So if I click apply and OK on that one, let's go to the computer science group. I can make JBlogs a member of that group as well. Okay, so now Joe is a member of 2 groups. Now in the computer science one, it may just be for playing around with a web server. So only this group can play with the web server and nobody else can. So that's what Active Directory is used for. It's for setting up users and groups and assigning security measures to the groups. And you'll see that we've got lots of security issues down here for different groups. But this means that the person needs to log on to the server for this to become active. And that's where I'm going to take you now just quickly. This is Windows 7. It's just a normal home PC, a standalone one. I've got 2 users. I've got myself and my wife. I'm going to log on as myself. And this is sort of a standalone computer, but also part of a peer network. So here we go. It's the standalone computer. If I was to join the school with this computer, I would need to change the way this logged in. So instead of giving you Anne or Keith to press on, I would just need to give you the box to say, can you type your username and log you in. And we can do that by managing the computer and going to properties. And this might help you out with some things that are in the school at the moment, a little bit of understanding how the computers link together. At the moment, this is part of a work group. That is peer-to-peer, a work group. So all computers on the network at home will be members of the work group and connected to one another. However, they won't be able to see a great deal, and I'll come to that shortly. We'll still need to share a particular folder for them to use. But I can change the way that it links to a computer. Now, this is not going to work because my computer hasn't actually got any physical links to the server, but I can go through it for you. So this is what I'm talking about. A lot of the times you might see that the computer has got a name, room 25, computer 01. So each computer would have its own computer name. At the moment it's part of a work group, a peer-to-peer network, and I can change that and I can say become a member of the domain. And the domain was year 10 at foresthigh.org.uk. Now, if I'd got a physical link, this would work. It's not going to work because it's only in a virtual machine. But that's what you would do to take it away from being a peer-to-peer to being part of a client-server network. And there you go. I can't do it because it can't find the actual server. So work group is peer-to-peer. This domain here is your client server. Windows 7 here is the client. What we saw where we were managing the usernames and passwords is the server. So let's go back to being part of the work group. Let's cancel that out. I'm on a Mac and I've got a folder on my Mac called Win7 Share. And all of these folders are on my Mac. But I have shared this. That's the whole point of the word share. So we're now talking about a peer-to-peer network where you're sharing files. So if I come to my Windows 7, let's close that out, and I get the file manager. At the moment it's disconnected from the drive, but there we go. I've clicked on there, and now I am actually looking at the shared folders. I can't see any more folders in my Mac, so if I go back to my file manager, I can't see any of these. I can't see Android Studio projects, applications, desktops. I can only see what's in Win7 Share. And to be honest, if I create a new folder, today's lesson. So I've created a new folder on a Mac. If I take a look, let's see if I can link that up again. No, I can't see it. It's probably correctly saying it's disconnected. I was playing around with this earlier. In fact, I know what it is. I've got the wrong version of Windows 7 up. But even so, we can see files that we are sharing, and I can do the same with the server. So if I go back to the server, and this one's not going to work because again it's a new machine that I set up. But if I go to the file manager, we should hopefully, no we can't, and there we are, Win7 Share, and that really should connect to the Mac folder. So every time I do a file in Windows, I can save it in one place. It's called a public location. It's sharing things. I can have one folder that I can share between all my different computers, and that would be part of a peer-to-peer network. I'm quickly going to see if I can start up a version of Win7, and that should work. So this is peer-to-peer and sharing files. You can have one folder on one machine that you can let all the other machines in your work group in your house see. They can't get access to anything else. And in that way, it's kind of like working like a network. And if you needed to back things up, you'd only need to back up that shared folder for everybody's work to be shared. Let's see if I've got it on this one. This seems to be linked. And if I scroll down, there we go. There's the folder I created on the Mac. I'm going to drag and drop a picture into it. I'm going back to the Mac. And I'm going to look in today's lesson, and then we've got the picture that I just dropped. So that is the way peer-to-peer share files between one another. It's not like a client-server network. Each one is its own computer, controlling its own resources, its own printers, but we can share resources. So that's probably been a little bit confusing. It's certainly been long. Let's see how we go with the understanding. Like I said at the start, the concept is easy, the practice is rather hard.